Hello, this is going to be a showcase of my builds. I have 5 builds I'm going to be talking about for the Control Wizard. We have AOE, Single Target, which are both Thaumaturge, Arcanist, which is of course Arcanist, specifically for Single Target, and then I have 2 specialized builds. One is for Dragons, which includes Dragon Hunts, the Crown of Keldagon trial, and the Tiamat trial. And then the other one is for Gzemnid, either the regular version of Gzemnid or Master Gzemnid's Reliquary. So I'm going to start off with my AOE loadout. I'll start off with gear, and then I'll move on to boons, companions, mounts, and then I'll finally talk about the powers that I use in each loadout. So for gear, I use the Exalted Maiden's Raid Mask. This of course comes from Temple of the Spider, Master Temple of the Spider. You both have to buy the legendary version and then upgrade it using the Menzo Baranzan campaign store. After that, I use the Mighty Cuirass. This comes from Dragon Hunts. It gives accuracy combat advantage 7.5%. I use the new Healing Mitts. These come from Master Demon Web Pits. They drop, I believe, just from the first boss. And then for my boots, I use the other Abyss gear. I use Mauler's Greaves. These come from, I believe, just the second boss, if I'm not mistaken. Or the first and second, one of the two. For my weapons, for AoE, I use the Weaver weapons. These come from Master Gzemnid's Reliquary. But you can definitely swap those out for really anything else. You can put the Perfect Jewel of Loth weapon, or the Perfect weapons. You can put the Mirage weapons. You can use the Mastercraft weapons. I just use the Weavers because they're free and they give high item level. So after that, we use the Scintillant set, the Amulet and the Sash, but instead of using the Amulet, you can instead go for the Shroomwood Amulet, because the Scintillant costs 8 mil for the Amulet, and the Sash is only 600k. So if we type in Shroomwood, it's only 200k. The only difference between using this instead of the Scintillant Amulet is you lose out on 6 strength, which is only 1.5% damage bonus, so it really doesn't matter. So after that, for the rings, I use 2 Master Demon Web Pit rings. These come from the chests at the end. We use the powers increased by 6% AoE powers, and then I use the 5% accuracy, 3% AP gain ring. For my shirt and pants, I use accuracy and critical strike. Both of these come from the auction house, but they drop from the heroic encounters in the new area. The critical strike might be a little bit expensive, so if you want to, you can instead use the old Dragon Hunt critical strike pants, because you can farm them for free. And then the shirt is fairly cheap. You can buy whatever stat you need: accuracy, crit sev, critical strike, or combat advantage, or not critical strike, combat advantage is what I meant. And they're all relatively cheap. I think less than 80k or so for all of them. For my artifacts, I use the primary artifact, the Envenom Journal. You can also use the Cleric Sigil. I just specifically use this in order to get my AP gain back. I believe both of them give about 20 to 25% AP gain over the course of a number of seconds. Or AP back, I should say. For my secondary artifacts, I just use artifacts for stats. We have power, crit severity, combat, crit severity, accuracy, combat, and power, crit severity, accuracy. These all are relatively expensive to buy, so if you need to switch them out for cheaper alternatives like the Eye of Odron that you can farm up, or the Mythalar Fragment, or the Dragonbone Blades, Demogorgon's Reach, any of these, Crystal of Souls Fight, then you can definitely take advantage of the cheaper alternatives. Enchantments, I use offense enchantments just based off of whatever stats you need. This Garnet specifically is more of a placeholder artifact, or placeholder enchantment, because I don't actually need any of the stats that I can get from offensive enchantments, so I just use power since it's the only rating that's not capped. And then for our utility, we always use Garnet because it gives Forte and there's no other good options to use for utility. Defensive enchantments, on the other hand, you want to make sure to go for something that actually gives good benefits. So the two options I recommend are Amethyst or Garnets because they give defense or awareness, and those are the maximum defensive benefits that you can gain. We use Rage of Flames, Devil's Precision Overloads all the time, and then we use the Lightning Flash all the time. For AOE, I use the Mythic Movement bonus, but you can switch that out if you don't have anything else. It's not that big a deal. I just use it to be able to keep up with the tank. After that, I'll talk about my boons. So for my guild boons, I just use the offensive enchantment just for stats. So I need Crit Strike. It gives 3000 Crit Strike. It says 300, but it's an incorrect tooltip. It's 3000. And then this also gives 3000 defense, and I'm assuming 800 combined rating. And then I use the movement speed bonus utility enchantment, or boon I mean. For my campaign boons, I use, of course, all power, and then all hit points, and then you also want to go for the movement speed once you get the ability to. And then all of the offensive enchantments, boons. And then you can also focus on the damage to certain targets boons after that. So I would recommend going for Fiends first, and then Undead, and then Cultists, and then Dinosaurs last if you have the points for it. You can also, if you have extra points, you can go into Awareness and Defense again. And then for our Tier 5 boons, definitely want to get Forte, and then the second one, you can either go for action point gain or recharge speed. I personally prefer action point gain, so that's what I use. Master boons, we use Bloodlust. This is what we use on every single loadout, AOE, single target, and everything else. Next we'll talk about companions. So we use the Shatterkai, which is our summoned companion. Other options are the Regist companion, or you can use the Minotaur or the Succubus. All three of those are pretty good options, but I think the Shatterkai, which is ultimately the best for dealing damage and CCing the enemies. For our equipments, we use Accuracy Combat Advantage, and Accuracy Critical Strike. These are just based off of what you have available and what stats you need, so I wouldn't worry too much about exactly matching what I have. We use the Mythic Companion enchantment, of course. And then on every single loadout, I use this enhancement. Precision, it gives 7.5% critical strike. I use that on every loadout. For our companion bonuses, I use the Raptor and the Minsk on every loadout. And then for AoE, I use the Neverwinter Knight, the Black Dragon Ironstone, and the Alchemist, Experimenter. I do use slightly different for these three, depending on what I'm completing, so I'll talk about those when I get to it. For mounts, I would recommend either the Pegasus as your combat power, or you can also use the Vortex of Despair. This is the Dark Omen mount, or you can use the Carpet of Flying, which I don't believe I have, but I'm gonna make a note, I would not recommend using this mount, Divine Intervention, because it pushes all the enemies away 3 miles away, and it makes it take much longer to kill the enemies because they won't be hit by your AoE powers because they're going to be all spread out from each other. So ultimately the best ones are the three that I mentioned, the two Vortex mounts and the Pegasus. I use Ferocity on every single loadout, AoE single target. And then for my mount insignias and collars, I use Practical. It can be whatever, gold bonus, glory bonus, or astral diamonds. Movement speed I use on every loadout. Critical severity I use on every loadout. Stamina gain, this one also doesn't really matter. I just use stamina gain because there's nothing else that's really good. And then encounter powers on every loadout is the best thing to use. For our bonuses, we use Executioner's Covenant, Lionhearts, ×2, Warlords and Menders. The only one I don't have a preferred slot on is this Lionhearts. I have Enlightened instead because there's no other mount that actually gives a Lionhearts that I have on this character. So I'm having to just use that instead. For the 5 mounts, these 3 on the bottom, Ebon Riding Lizard, Demon Wings, and Deadly Drider form, you can get all 3 of these from lockboxes and buy them on the auction house. But these 2 came from events that are no longer available. The Neverwinter Hand, I believe, came from the Protector's Jubilee, and it's not account-wide, so the characters you wanted it on, you had to farm it on those characters. And the Slab of Vecna was previously available in the Wondrous Bazaar for, I think, about 2.5 mil, but it is also no longer available. So next I'll talk about what powers I use. For AOE, I use Icy Terrain, R1 with Chill Strike, Conduit of Ice, and Fireball. At Wills, we use Chilling Cloud, Scorching Burst. I primarily use Chilling Cloud, but you can also do Scorching Burst here and there to apply Smolder to the targets so that you can get extra AP back, which I'll show in a second. Arcane Singularity daily pretty much all the time, but Ice Knife, I sometimes use it on larger enemies, like the mini-boss between the first and second boss in Demon Web Pits. Class features, we use Combustive Action and Critical Conflagration. Feats, we use Down, Up, 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 Up. So for Smolder, when your Smolder deals damage to an enemy, you gain Action Point gain, and that's the reason why you might want to add Smolder to targets with this occasionally, here and there. So now for my actual stats. Let's see, I'm buffed up right now. Power, and so the buffs that I use Sunlords, Watermelon Sorbet, Flask of Potency, and I also use the Spider Totem. And all of these buffs I use in every single loadout, so I don't have to worry about proccing something else or using expensive squash soup. That's why I use these foods in particular, or watermelon in particular. So, my stats, I will quickly put on Mystic Aura to show. So I get all the greens with just Mystic Aura. I don't need a Runic Aura or a Pack Tactics to cap anything else. This is AOE, so my critical strike goes up by 7.5% with the companion enhancement. I think that's it. Combat advantage, well here, it actually goes up by 15% because of the lightning flash as well, I forgot to mention. So with all of these, that's what my stats look like. Accuracy is, let me see if I can get that up. So combat advantage is 87 right now, but it does proc to 90 because of the tutor. And as you see, accuracy, if it doesn't proc to 90, it's at least like 87%. My power goes up to 90 with the 5 raptors. I currently only have 1 raptor, so I'm missing about 14% extra power with the other 4 players. So next I'll go ahead and talk about my single target loadout. There aren't too many things I switched, but there are a few notable. First of all, I switched this helmet out. I used the Critical Strike Healing Guard helmet instead, because I don't need the AP gain one from the other helmet, because I can't kill enemies in single target for the most part, or there aren't very many enemies to kill. I also switched the weapon set out for the Mirage set. Of course, I use Chilling Cloud as the primary enhancement, and then I use Action Point Gain and Critical Strike, which I do switch to accuracy for a couple loadouts, which I'll show in a second. My primary artifact, I switch over to the Crystal. This one is the best one to use for a DPS, but there's only one person that should be using it. The other people should definitely be using debuff artifacts. So based off of what people tell you to use or ask you to use, that's what you want to have as your primary. But I just have the crystal as the placeholder until someone tells me to use something else. The 3 secondaries are the same. My shirt, I switch over to the combat advantage one because that's what I need for the stats. And then I also switch this encounter ring out, or I put the encounter ring on instead of the power, the damage to multiple targets ring. Enchantments, I switch over to the action point gain bonus. You can also use the recharge speed, which I don't have, I don't believe, but I like the action point gain one instead, primarily. For my offensive enchantments, I might switch here and there based off of what stats I need. So I'm not going to really look too much into what I use for those. And then for our boons, I use the Revive Sickness on all of my single target loadouts, just because it's way more beneficial than movement speed in single target. Boons are basically all the same, of course Bloodlust still. Companions, I use the Black Death Scorpion for single target, but you have a few other options. You can use the Batiri, the Greenscale Bowman, the War Drummer, which I don't have upgraded, the Pseudo Dragon, the Blasphemous Assassin is also good, but I just keep on the Black Death Scorpion because it does quite good damage and it applies that 100% combat advantage bonus for everybody. For companion gear, it's just maybe a little bit switched around here and there. Everything else is the same. I switched the Black Dragon Ion Stone over to the Batiri for single target bosses, and I also put the Dark Dealings on. Using both of these, I get that extra 10% critical strike with this helmet, which is why I'm able to switch out the Black Dragon Ion Stone and the Alchemist Experimenter, which both of those together give about 10%. So that's the reason why I'm able to get that. And then for mounts, of course I use the Wicked Lich now on single target. It's currently bugged right now, so it's the best thing to use, but if you don't have it, if you weren't able to buy it, I wouldn't worry too much because they're eventually going to fix it, and it's not going to be as good as the other options. So if you don't have it, you can use the Golden Touch, or the Tunnel Vision, or the Giant Toad Tongue Lash, which all three of those are 3000 magnitude, strong single target attack. I use mostly the same stuff. It looks like I do put on a Protector's Covenant for this loadout, but my stats are all still capped on every loadout. And collars and everything else all the same. And it looks like I do switch over to the Red Dragon Wings, but I think the Red Dragon Wings and the Slab of Vecna both give the same bonuses, so that's fine. If you have one or the other, then you can use them. The Red Dragon Wings comes from the Zen store. That's where you can buy it from. And I'll also switch over to Mystic Aura once again just to show. So all greens once again. I don't need a Runic Aura, I don't need a Pack Tactics. And then to show my stat procs, I will quickly show that. And I'll go through the powers in a second here, and the rotation and everything. So for powers, I proc up to 89% crit strike, and my combat advantage will be 90% when I have a tutor. And my power will, of course, once again be 90% with the raptor, the 5 raptors. So that's where I get those stats from. My critical strike is 90% if I proc the critical strike bonus on the spider totem, or if I have a paladin in the party running the 2% aura, or if I have a healer that's running the 2% critical strike chestplate, which I'll show here in a second. It's this one. It gives 2% critical strike if your teammates are closer to the healer. So all three of those options gets me the extra 1% that I'm missing. Now for powers, I still use Chilling Cloud. I use Magic Missiles, which I'll show in a second as to what I do with those. I use Repel, Entangling Force, Icy Rays, and Fireball in R1. And then I use Ice Knife primarily. If there's a boss that spawns a bunch of mobs, like the second boss in Master Demo Web Pits, then I might use Arcane Singularity. But 99% of the time is Ice Knife during artifact calls. I switch Combustive and put on the Swath of Destruction for single target. And then I also switch 2 of these feats to bottom. So instead of all top, I use Shatter Strike and Rhyme-Fire Weaving for single target. But I believe either 2 of these probably do about the same amount of damage. And either 2 of these probably do about the same amount of damage. It's really a toss-up, but that's just what I use. So in terms of the rotation, so for Magic Missile, it's what you use to proc the Arcane Mastery primarily. You can get up to 10 stacks, actually no, 5 stacks of Arcane Mastery. So at the start, before you use artifacts in your encounters, I would recommend trying to proc Magic Missile a few times to get those stacks of Arcane Mastery. Because the only other way you proc Arcane Mastery is through these 2 skills, Repel and Entangling Force. The other 2 skills are, of course, this is Ice and this is Fire. So, I'll just quickly show what I do. So, Magic Missiles a few times, artifacts, all 4 of your encounters, mount, daily, and then your Dragonfire Gidget or Hawk or whatever you have as your thing. And then basically just keep using Chilling Cloud every time and use your encounters when they come off cooldown. That's basically all there is to the wizard. There's not really anything else involved besides just spamming your encounters when they're off cooldown. There's a little bit of a rotation during the artifact calls, but outside of that, you just pretty much use your powers as they come off cooldown. One thing I will note is I would recommend using at least 3 of your encounter powers right when you pop artifacts, like maybe wait 2 or 3 seconds so that more artifacts are up. And then that will allow you to proc your helmet, as many stacks as you can, as well as your chestplate, as well as this scintillant amulet neck and waist set. You can get extra 7.5% accuracy with 3 encounter powers, so I would try to buff your 2 larger hits as much as possible. After you use those couple encounter powers, I would recommend popping the Wicked Lich and then using your daily afterwards. That way, the Wicked Lich will buff the damage of your daily power by 15%. And then if you have any encounter powers left over, then you can pop those right after you use your daily as well. Let me switch back to Ferocity. And I'll also switch this back to Ferocity. Now for my other loadouts, I'll go over Arcanist first. Arcanist, I am also, once again, Mystic Aura, so you can see all the greens. What I switched for Arcanist is you can switch this out for Ray of Frost if you really want to. It's 5,000 every time you switch, because that's our primary at-will that we're using on Arcanist, but if you're just switching for like a boss here and there, then I wouldn't worry about trying to spend 5,000 AD for slightly extra damage. For our gear, we switch over to this chestplate. This comes from the last boss in Master Demo Web Pits. Since on Domiters we gain 20% critical severity, we have to get that extra 20% somewhere, so we need this chestplate. It gives 18% critical severity. Everything else is the same. We do switch over to this this shirt. This comes from the auction house, or you can farm it in the old Dragonbone Vale area, but I would recommend just buying it because it's super cheap. He has 5% combat advantage, because once again we have to switch this shirt on, so we miss the 7.5% combat advantage from that chestplate previously. And then we can also, I was using other artifacts, but we can use these. And let me just reproc my buffs. So there we go, we're still in the green. So once again, primary artifact you can switch out for whatever people want you to use. Enchantments might be here and there different, but it looks like they're mostly the same. Boons, once again, everything's pretty much the same. Companions, pretty much everything's the same. I believe everything is the same except maybe slightly different companion equipment. Mounts, of course we're using Ferocity, I just have Mystic Aura to show my stats. Mounts are for the most part the same. I'll just stay on this page for a second. And then I will just show the powers real quick. So we're using Ray of Frost. That's pretty much all we use. You don't really ever use any other Atwill. Repel, Entangling Force, Ray of Enfeeblement on R1, and Disintegrate. We use Arcane Empowerment as our primary daily, and we sometimes use Ice Knife if you don't have 10 seconds to get the maximum benefit from Arcane Empowerment. Ice Knife if it's like really fast phasing and everything. Otherwise, Arcane Empowerment, probably 95 to 99% of the time is Arcane Empowerment. We use Chilling Presence and Storm Spell. Storm Spell you always want to have on, but the second class feature is between a few options, but I have found Chilling Presence to be the most amount of damage you can gain. Feats, pretty much everybody uses the same stuff for the most part. We use Spell Twisting, Snap Freeze, Chaos Magic, Striking Advantage, and the Step Above Mastery. So I'll quickly show my stats. So I gain 18% crit severity from this chestplate. I gain 25% critical strike from my my combat enchantment, my companion enhancement, and my helmet. I gain about 15% accuracy from this neck and waist set and my lightning flash, and I gain 10% combat advantage from my boots and the tutor in the group. So I'm technically missing 0.7% combat advantage, and I'm missing about 5% accuracy. Power, of course, goes up to 90 with auras and the raptor easily. So I will quickly go over the rotation now, and I'll also show the stats. So pretty much when you first start the fight, you want to pop all 4 of your encounters, and then you use Artifact, Arcane Empowerment, and then maybe pop a few more encounters, and then use your mount, and then continue to use your encounters as they come off cooldown. So I'll quickly show that. So all 4 encounters, Artifact, daily, maybe 1 or 2 more encounters, mount, and then continue to use your encounters after they come off cooldown. Arcane Empowerment gives a very high recharge speed to your encounters, which is why you're able to use so many. And now if I go to my stats, let me see if I can get some better procs here. Let me just get my daily back and I'll try to get procs and stuff there. Well, my crit strike is still not proccing up for some reason. There we go, 89 crit strike. It'll be 89.3% combat advantage, and of course accuracy we saw was about 85% or something. And power is of course 90 with the raptor. So that's where I get all those stats from. Now I will quickly, let me switch back to Ferocity. I will show my 2 specialized builds. So one is for dragons. This includes Tiamat, Crown of Keldagon, and Dragon Hunts. So I switch, first of all I switch this over to accuracy. That's what I need to cap my stats, so I need to switch over. Everything else is fairly similar. I do switch out this ring. I use the 10% damage against dragons. And of course previously I was using the encounter damage ring, but we switch over to the dragon one instead. Oh yeah, and then of course, my stats are still in the green. Everything else is pretty much the same, maybe different enchantments here and there. Of course, action point bonus still. For boons, everything's the same. Companions, for Tiamat, I use the Shatterkai Witch, but for the other two pieces of content I mentioned, you can just use a regular single target companion. The Black Death Scorpion, the Batiri, the Greenscale, Blasphemous Assassin. I also use the Dragon Bane. This is the Dragon Hunter companion. If you don't have that, you can still just keep on the Neverwinter Knight. But the Dragon's Bane is of course better because it's 11%. You can also switch your Rage of Flames out for a damage to dragon type enemies. This gives 10% damage instead of the 5%, so that's the reason why you would do that. Mounts, I'll just quickly switch that back. So mounts, we use, maybe slightly different insignias here and there, but for the most part they're all the same. And then one last thing is I used the Wondrous Dragon Gidget thing here instead of the other dragon one, the Dragon Fire. This gives 6% damage resistance and, more importantly, damage against dragons. So my stats are pretty much the same. They're all capped, just like my other loadouts. For Gzemnid, I switch the two rings out for the Gzemnid rings. One of them is 10% damage against beholders, the other one gives you 6% more damage when you dodge for 10 seconds, because it doubles in the Underdark. Everything else is pretty much the same. Companions, pretty much the same. Of course, I use Neverwinter Knight again, since there's no Beholder's ring, or Beholder's damage thing. And then I'll just quickly show my mythic stats, or my green stats, I mean. So they're still all the same. Nothing really changes aside from the two rings I use, and I'm back to using the Dragonfire Gidget thing. And I believe that's pretty much everything. In terms of rotation, it's still the same because it's still single target. Everything is exactly the same. It's just I changed a few pieces of gear based off of what I am completing. And I only have these two loadouts, one for Gzemnid, one for Dragon. Single target I use in just regular dungeons. That's what I use, every time. And of course I just switch this back to Crit Strike for dungeons. The only one that I switch is Arcanist and Dragons. I switch this over to the Accuracy one instead. And that's pretty much it. So I hope this helped everybody if you're trying to build something. And of course you don't need this many loadouts to complete the content. You really only need one for AOE, one for single target. But I just wanted to show everything. So thanks for watching, and I hope this helped.